In a small village in the ancient kingdom of Magadha, there lived a young woman named Siddhi. She was known for her extraordinary skill in pottery, creating vases and bowls that were true works of art. Every piece she crafted carried not only beauty but also her energy and dedication. One day, after months of working on a special collection for the spring festival, something unexpected happened. On the night before the festival, a violent storm hit the village. The roof of her workshop couldn't withstand the force of the water, and many of her most precious pieces were destroyed. At dawn, when Siddhi entered her workshop and saw the aftermath of the storm, she felt as if her heart had been shattered. Months of work, dozens of unique pieces, all reduced to shards on the muddy floor. Anger and sadness overwhelmed her, and she fell to her knees, crying bitterly. It was then that Ananda, a disciple of the Buddha who was passing through the village, heard her sobs. Gently approaching, he observed the scene and asked if he could come in. "Why is the universe so unfair?" Siddhi asked through her tears. "I put so much love into every piece, and now everything is destroyed." Ananda sat beside her and shared the teaching of the second arrow. "Siddhi, what you are experiencing right now are two distinct pains. The first is like an arrow that strikes your heart, the real loss of your work. This is the first arrow, an event that could not be avoided. But there is a second arrow, which is the story you are creating about this loss, the injustice, the anger, the despair. This second arrow is optional, and it is what multiplies your suffering." He picked up one of the shards from the ground and continued, "Look at this broken piece. It represents the impermanence that the Buddha teaches us. Everything in this world is in constant change. Our emotions are like the weather, sometimes stormy, sometimes calm. The point is not to avoid the storm, but to learn how to navigate through it." Siddhi looked at the shard in her hands, noticing how the morning light created different patterns on its broken surface. "But how can I not feel this pain?" she asked. "It's not about not feeling it," Ananda replied. "Feel the sadness, acknowledge its presence, but observe it as you would a cloud in the sky. It's here now, but it's not permanent. It's not your identity. It's just a passing phenomenon in your consciousness." As they talked, Siddhi began to notice something interesting in the scattered shards. The light from the rising sun, shining through the gaps in the damaged roof, created a mosaic of reflections on the workshop floor. It was as if her broken pieces were telling a new story. "Maybe," she said after a moment of contemplation, "I can create something new with these fragments. Something that speaks of transformation and acceptance." Ananda smiled. "Do you see how your mind is already beginning to open to new possibilities? This is the first step in managing emotions, recognizing that they are like the materials in your hands. You can be overwhelmed by them, or you can learn to work with them, transforming them into something new and meaningful." In the days following the storm, Siddhi began gathering the shards of her broken ceramics. Each fragment she picked up brought with it a wave of emotions, sometimes sadness, sometimes frustration, and occasionally even a flicker of hope. Ananda, who had decided to stay in the village for a few days, watched her process with interest. On one particularly difficult morning, when the sadness felt heavier than usual, Ananda found Siddhi sitting amidst the fragments, silent tears streaming down her face. "Siddhi," he gently called, "let me share with you a practice that the Buddha himself taught. Have you ever observed how a lake behaves?" She nodded, wiping her tears. "When the surface of the lake is disturbed, we cannot see its bottom. But when the waters become calm, everything becomes clear. Our mind is like that lake. Shall we try an exercise together?" Ananda asked Siddhi to sit comfortably and close her eyes. "Now, just as you examine each shard of ceramic with careful attention to detail, examine your emotions. Where do you feel the sadness in your body? Don't try to change it, just observe it." Siddhi noticed a tightness in her chest, a lump in her throat. "It feels like there's a weight here," she said, touching her heart. "Excellent observation," Ananda replied. "Now imagine you are observing that weight the same way you would observe one of your ceramic pieces. Notice its texture, its intensity, its subtle changes." As she practiced, Siddhi began to notice something interesting. Just as each shard of ceramic had its own unique shape and texture, her emotions also had different qualities and intensities. "There are moments," she shared, "when the sadness feels smaller, almost unnoticeable, and other times when it grows like a wave. Ananda smiled. Exactly. The Buddha taught us that everything is in constant change. Your emotions are like waves in the ocean. They rise, grow, and eventually subside. The practice of mindfulness allows us to observe this movement without being swept away by it. He picked up one of the most beautiful shards and continued. Look at this fragment. It has cracks, irregularities, but it also has beauty. Our emotions are like that too. When we observe them with mindfulness, we begin to see not only the pain but also the wisdom they carry. In the days that followed, Siddhi began applying this practice to her work. As she sorted through the fragments, she observed not only the shards but also her emotional reactions to them. When sadness arose, she noticed it. When a moment of joy appeared upon finding a special piece, she acknowledged that too. It feels like I'm learning a new way of creating, she said to Ananda. Before, I focused only on shaping the clay. Now I'm learning to work with the material of my emotions too. Exactly, Ananda replied. Mindfulness is like the skillful hands of an artisan. It allows us to touch our emotional experiences with gentleness and wisdom, shaping them not through force, but through understanding. As Siddhi practiced mindfulness with her ceramic shards, she began to notice something beyond her own pain. In the village, other artisans had also suffered losses from the storm. Old Zen had lost his roof, young Maya saw her tapestries soaked, and little Raj had his wooden toys destroyed. One morning, while sorting the fragments by color and texture, Siddhi heard sobbing outside her workshop. It was Maya, the weaver, walking by with the remnants of her ruined fabrics. Ananda, Siddhi said, my heart aches seeing Maya like this. It's a different kind of pain, not like before. The monk smiled gently. What you are experiencing, Siddhi, is the awakening of compassion. It's when we begin to see that suffering is not just our own, but a shared experience among all beings. He then shared an ancient story. The Buddha once encountered a mother named Kisagotami, who had lost her only child. Maddened by grief, she carried the child's body, pleading for a miracle. The Buddha asked her to bring a mustard seed from a household that had never lost a loved one. After searching in vain, she realized suffering is universal, but through this understanding, we find true compassion. Inspired by this story, Siddhi had an idea. She gathered all the artisans in the village and proposed something extraordinary. What if we used our damaged works to create something new? Something that brings us together? In the days that followed, her workshop became a space for collective healing. Maya brought her stained fabrics, which started to serve as the base for a mosaic. Old Zen contributed pieces of wood from his fallen roof, which were incorporated into the project. Even Raj's broken toys found a new purpose in the composition. Look, Ananda said, observing the work in progress. When we open our hearts to the pain of others, our own pain begins to transform. It's like your broken ceramics. Each fragment, though shattered, contributes to creating something greater and more meaningful. As they worked together, Siddhi noticed how her own emotions shifted. The sadness was still there, but now it was accompanied by a sense of connection and purpose. Each time she comforted Maya, encouraged Zen, or made Raj smile, her own heart healed a little more. It's curious, she remarked to Ananda. The more I care about the well-being of others, the lighter my own heart feels. That, he replied, is the power of true compassion. As the Buddha taught, it is like a candle. By lighting the way for others, it naturally illuminates our own path as well. The collective project took shape. A large mural on the village's main wall, made from the fragments of all the destroyed works. Ceramics, fabric, wood, and colors blended into a pattern that told the story not just of the storm, but of the regeneration and unity of the community. The spring festival had finally arrived in the village. Unlike what Siddhi had originally planned, the grand collective mural would be unveiled during the celebrations. On the morning of the ceremony, she was in her workshop contemplating a new vase she had just crafted, the first since the storm. Ananda found her there, alternately looking at the new vase and the community mural through the window. Is something on your mind, Siddhi? It's strange, she replied, running her fingers over the surface of the new vase. Before the storm, I saw perfection in every piece. Now I see beauty even in the imperfections. But sometimes I wonder, am I being too lenient with the flaws? Ananda sat nearby and picked up a musical instrument that was resting against the wall, an old sitar that belonged to one of the villagers. "Let me share a teaching the Buddha once gave to a musician," he said, adjusting the strings of the instrument. "What happens if the strings are too tight?" "They might break," Siddhi answered, "and if they are too loose, they won't produce any sound." Exactly. The Buddha taught that the path to enlightenment is like tuning an instrument. It should be neither too tight nor too loose. This is what we call the middle way. Ananda gently plucked the strings of the sitar. "Look at your journey since the storm. At first you swung between two extremes, either consumed by the loss of perfection or wanting to give up completely. But look at where you are now." Siddhi glanced at her hands, marked by clay. "I found a new way to create. It's neither the obsessive pursuit of perfection I had before, nor the total abandonment of the craft. That is the middle way," Ananda smiled. "It's not a path of mediocre compromise, but a dynamic state of balance. Like a tightrope walker, always moving, but maintaining the center." At that moment, the first sounds of the festival began to echo through the village. Siddhi and Ananda walked toward the collective mural, where the villagers had already gathered. The morning sun illuminated the fragments, casting reflections and shadows that seemed to bring the artwork to life. "Look at how each piece has found its place," Ananda observed. "Some are more prominent, others more subtle. Some still show their fractures, others have transformed completely. Each contributes to the whole." Siddhi realized that the mural was a perfect representation of the middle way, not an attempt to hide the scars of the storm, nor a surrender to chaos. It was a conscious transformation, a balance between accepting what was lost and creating something new. "My art has changed," she reflected. "Before, I fought against any imperfection. After the storm, I thought I had to accept any outcome. Now I understand that I can seek beauty while embracing imperfections. They aren't opposites. They're part of the same whole." Siddhi's story teaches us that the middle way is not a fixed formula, but a constant dance between extremes. Like the artisan who knows when to press and when to release the clay, we learn to navigate our emotions with wisdom and balance. It's not about feeling nothing, nor about being overwhelmed by feelings. It's about finding that precise point where acceptance and transformation meet. And just like the village mural, our emotional journey becomes a work of art in itself, not despite the fractures and patches, but because of them. Every experience, every emotion finds its place in the grand mosaic of our lives, creating something that is simultaneously imperfect and perfectly complete.